The ropes bit deep into my wrists, cutting the skin until warm blood trickled down my forearms and soaked the coarse fibers. I stood tied to a thick wooden post in the middle of the slave market, the afternoon sun beating down on the dusty clearing hidden among the pine trees. Every shallow breath sent a spike of pain through my cracked ribs where the border raiders had kicked me again and again after they jumped me that morning in Raven's Fang Pass. They had taken my horses, my only livelihood, and dragged me here like a sack of grain to be sold to the highest bidder. I was 32 years old, with no family, no land, and nothing to my name except the clothes on my back and the calluses earned from years of leading strings of horses across the borderlands for whoever would pay. Greyford's Edge had been my home in name only. I moved from one job to the next, sleeping under open sky more often than under a roof. That life had kept me alive, but it had also left me alone. Now it had left me here. The slave traders circled like crows, laughing and jeering. "Horsemen with no horses!" one of them shouted, and the others joined in, tossing out a few copper pieces only to humiliate me further. They listed what I might be good for, digging in the deep mines until my lungs gave out, hauling logs for the lumber camps, forced conscript into some lord's army, or simply traded between warlords as currency. No serious bids came. Just mockery and low offers that made the traders roar with laughter. I kept my jaw locked and my eyes straight ahead. I had learned long ago that begging or cursing only made the beatings worse, so I stood there, bleeding and silent, while the crowd of buyers and gawkers watched. One figure stood out from the rest. She was an orc woman, tall and broad-shouldered, her deep green skin marked with old scars and fresh bruises. Her cloak was torn at the hem, her arms bared to the cold air. Golden eyes, tired but sharp, studied me from the edge of the circle. She didn't laugh with the others. She simply watched, as if weighing something only she could see. I didn't know her name then, but later I would learn it was Asha Blackthorn, 24 winters old, alone, and running from her own people the same way I had once run from nothing at all. When the trader began the final call and the offer stayed pathetic, she stepped forward. Without ceremony, she reached into her cloak and placed 3 items on the ground in front of him. A bone bracelet carved with delicate ancestral runes, a small knife with an intricately etched handle, and a string of polished beads that looked like the last pieces of a broken family heirloom. Her voice was low, steady, and carried across the sudden hush. "Release him. He comes with me." The entire camp fell silent. The trader's greedy eyes widened at the valuables. He didn't hesitate. He nodded once, and his men moved to cut the ropes. As the last knot came free, one of the traders shoved me hard between the shoulder blades, trying to send me sprawling for sport. She moved faster than I expected, stepping between us. Her voice rang out, clear and commanding enough to stop every man in the clearing. "Do not touch him. He is my husband." The words hit me like a second blow. I had never seen this woman before in my life. But in the rough border law of these parts, once a man was claimed as a husband in a legitimate transaction, the seller could no longer lay hands on him. The traders backed off immediately, muttering and spitting, but they let me go. She didn't look at me. She only murmured under her breath, close enough that only I could hear, "Follow me if you want to live." I followed. My legs felt unsteady after hours of being bound, but I kept pace as she led me out of the camp and along a narrow trail into the pines. We walked until the sounds of the market faded behind us. At the edge of the forest, she stopped beside a small hide tent half hidden by low branches. She knelt, struck flint to steel, and kindled a small fire with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from exhaustion or cold, I couldn't tell. I sat across from her on the hard ground, rubbing the raw skin of my wrists. The flames crackled between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Why did you do that?" She stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. Her voice was quiet, almost tired. "I need someone who doesn't look at me like merchandise. And you need someone who will stand in front of you." Night had settled fully by then. The fire painted shifting shadows across her strong features and the faint tribal markings that ran along her arms. I hadn't accepted her as my wife. I hadn't even learned her name yet, but I also didn't stand up and walk away into the dark. We sat there, 2 strangers bound by a lie that had just saved both our lives, while the forest whispered around us and the fire slowly burned down to glowing coals. The sky was still black when she shook my shoulder. I woke instantly, the habit of years on the road making my body alert before my mind caught up. Asha crouched beside the dying coals, her golden eyes reflecting the faint red glow. She held out the last strip of dried meat, the final piece from her small pack. "Eat," she said quietly. "You're hurt worse than I am." I took it, but broke the strip in half and pushed the larger piece back toward her. "You need strength, too. We're both running." She stared at the meat for a moment, then accepted it without argument. We ate in silence, chewing slowly, making each bite last. The meat was tough and salty, but it was food, and for the first time in days I wasn't eating it alone while tied to a post. When we finished, she stood, stamped out the last embers with her boot, and nodded toward the trail. "We leave now, before the traders wake." We slipped out of the small hide tent and moved into the pre-dawn dark. Asha went first, her step sure even in the low light. She bent occasionally to sweep a pine branch behind us, brushing away our footprints in the soft needle litter. I followed, keeping my breathing steady despite the sharp ache in my ribs. Every few paces I glanced back, listening for voices or the crack of twigs that would mean pursuit. She knew the forest the way I knew the rhythm of a horse's gait. I knew wind direction, how to read disturbed moss or bent grass, how to tell if riders had passed recently. Without speaking, we fell into a quiet partnership, her leading, me watching our back trail. For the first time since the raiders had taken me, I wasn't moving as a prisoner. I was moving with someone. We walked for hours. The sun rose behind the trees, turning the mist gold. When the path grew rocky and the trees thinned, Asha stopped at a cluster of boulders and lowered herself to the ground with a soft grunt. I sat across from her, careful not to twist my injured side. She drank from her water skin, then passed it to me. After I drank, I asked the question that had been burning since the market. "Who's chasing you?" Asha looked out over the valley below us for a long moment before answering. Her voice stayed low. "My own clan, the Black Fang. They needed someone to blame for a raid on a human village 2 moons ago. The chieftain's son led it. He burned the grain stores, killed 3 men, took what he wanted. When the humans sent riders demanding justice, the chieftain pointed at me. Said I had argued against the raid, said I was soft, said I must have warned the village." She gave a bitter laugh that held no humor. "I never warned anyone, I just refused to join the war party. That was enough." She picked at a loose thread on her cloak. "They stripped my weapons, beat me, and left me for the traitors to find. If they catch me now, they won't drag me back for trial. They'll kill me on the spot and call it justice." I watched her face. So they didn't want the truth. They wanted a scapegoat. She met my eyes then, really looked at me as if seeing me for the first time since the market. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, maybe relief. No one had said it that plainly before. We rested only a short while. When we stood to move again, she studied the ground ahead, her shoulders tensed. "Hoof prints," she whispered. "Fresh, one rider, moving slow, looking for sign." I knelt beside the faint impressions in the moss. "Scout, not hunting hard yet, but he's close enough to pick up our trail if we're careless." We changed direction immediately, cutting deeper into thick underbrush where the canopy blocked the sky. The going was slower, branches snagging our clothes, but it hid our passage better. Asha's steps grew heavier as the day wore on. The bruises on her arms and shoulders were darkening, and I noticed the way she favored her left leg. She never complained. When we crossed a shallow, rocky stream, I tore a strip from the hem of my tunic, soaked it in the cold water, and offered it to her without a word. She took it, pressed it to the worst bruise on her shoulder, and gave me a small nod. Her eyes still held caution, but the edge of suspicion had softened. Night found us under a low overhang of rock that formed a natural shelter. I gathered dry wood while she kept watch. The fire I built was small, shielded by the stone so the light wouldn't carry far. We sat close to it, sharing what little warmth it gave. I spoke into the quiet. "If I wanted to leave, I could have slipped away this afternoon while you were ahead." She turned her head toward me. The firelight danced across her tusks and the strong line of her jaw. "I know," she said, but knowing isn't the same as trusting." I nodded. "Then let time do the rest." She didn't answer, but when she lay down on the hard ground a short while later, she closed her eyes and let her breathing even out. For the first time since we had left the market, she slept while I kept watch. Hours later, in the deep of night, her hand touched my shoulder. I woke at once. She crouched beside me, ear tilted toward the forest. "Nothing close," she whispered. "But the woods are too quiet." I understood. The silence itself was a warning. Danger had not vanished. It had simply drawn back to watch. We traded places. As I settled against the rock, I realized something important. had changed between us. She was no longer running alone. I was no longer just a prisoner who had been cut loose. In the darkness, we had begun to guard each other's backs. The second day broke gray and cold, the kind of morning that made every bruise feel deeper. We moved along a narrow crevice between two sheer rock walls, staying off the wider trails where riders could spot us from a distance. My ribs throbbed with every step, a hot knife twisting under my skin, but I kept my mouth shut. Asha walked ahead, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She had barely slept the night before, even while I kept watch. Dark circles shadowed her golden eyes, and the bruises on her arms had turned a deeper purple. She missed a foothold on a loose patch of scree. Her boot slipped. I lunged forward without thinking and caught her elbow, steadying her before she could fall. Her whole body went rigid under my fingers, muscles locking like iron. I released her immediately. Stepping back with my hands open and empty, she turned, breathing hard. For a heartbeat, her eyes flicked to my face, searching. Then she said, voice low and rough, "You didn't take advantage when I was weak." I met her gaze. "You bought my freedom back there. I'm not repaying it by putting new chains on you." She stared at me a moment longer, then gave a single nod. We kept moving. Later, when the sun climbed high enough to warm the stones, we stopped beside a shallow stream hidden by ferns. Asha knelt to drink. I sat on a flat rock, trying not to wince as I eased my side. The water rushed cold and clear between us. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and asked without looking up, "Why do you live like this? Always moving, no clan, no home." I watched the current swirl around a mossy stone. "I had friends once. Worked a big horse string together near the border. One night they decided the pay wasn't enough and sold the whole herd while I was out scouting. Took the gold and left me with nothing but the rope they used to tie me to a tree so I wouldn't follow. After that, I stopped believing anyone would stick around long enough to matter." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I ran from the people who were supposed to protect me, my own blood. The chieftain needed a traitor to blame. I was convenient. No parents left alive to argue, no strong brothers to stand beside me." She looked across the water at me. So we both learned the same lesson, just on opposite sides of the same blade. Neither of us offered pity. We didn't need it. Understanding was enough. Night found us in a small clearing deep inside a stand of ancient pines. The trees grew so thick their branches knitted overhead like a roof. Asha wanted the first watch. "My ears are better," she said, tapping the side of her head. I shook my head. "If you collapse from exhaustion, those good ears won't help either of us. Sleep first, I'll wake you when it's time." She argued, of course, stubborn as the mountains, but in the end she lay down on the carpet of needles curling on her side. I took off my worn cloak and draped it over her shoulders. She clutched the edge of it without opening her eyes, holding the fabric close like it was something rare and fragile. I sat with my back to a trunk, the small fire crackling low between us, and kept watch while the forest breathed around us. Hours later, her hand touched my knee. I came awake at once. She was sitting up, the cloak still around her, eyes alert in the firelight. "You're not afraid of me," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "Why?" I looked at the dying flames. "If I didn't trust you, I would have slept with my back to the rock and my knife in my fist. Instead, I slept close to the fire where you could reach me if you needed to. That's how I know." She lowered her gaze to the ground. After a long silence, she admitted, "I was afraid of you at first. Still am a little. But not the same way." I didn't push. We let the words settle between us like warm ash. Morning brought the next sign of danger. While we were breaking camp, Asha found the remains of a small, carefully hidden fire in a hollow not 50 paces from our shelter. The ashes were still warm. She crouched, fingers brushing the ground. "Scout fire!" she muttered. "They're close, closer than yesterday." We abandoned the easy path and climbed a steep talus slope where loose stones shifted under our boots. My ribs screamed with every reach and pull. Sweat stung my eyes. Halfway up, I had to stop, leaning against a boulder, breath coming short. Asha turned back immediately, hand outstretched. "Go ahead," I rasped. "I'll catch up." She didn't move. "If you fall, I fall with you." The words landed heavier than any rock on that slope. I looked at her, tired, battered, still standing between me and the world that wanted us both dead, and something tight in my chest loosened. I took her offered hand. Together we crested the ridge and dropped down the far side into thicker cover. Late that afternoon, we pressed ourselves flat behind a massive fallen boulder while two riders passed 20 yards away. Their horses' hooves crunched on dry leaves. I pulled Asha down lower, my arm across her back, keeping her head below the line of sight. She was close enough that I felt her heart hammering against my ribs. Her breath trembled across my neck. I whispered against her ear, "I'm here." Her fingers found mine and closed tight, not out of panic, not out of necessity, because she believed me. The riders moved on. We stayed hidden until the forest swallowed their sound. Even after they were gone, she didn't let go of my hand right away. That night we made camp in a shallow cave where the stone still held a little of the day's warmth. The fire was smaller than before, just enough to keep the chill off. Asha sat staring into it, knees drawn up. After a long silence, she spoke, voice barely louder than the crackle of the wood. "I said you were my husband that day, because I needed you alive, because the lie would protect us both." I waited. She turned her head and looked straight at me, firelight dancing in her golden eyes. "Now I don't know anymore, because if it was only a lie, why does the thought of losing you scare me more than the hunters on our trail?" I didn't answer right away. The words sat between us, heavy and true. Inside my chest, something old and guarded finally burned away, leaving only the quiet certainty that whatever this was, bargain, bond, or something neither of us had a name for yet, it had already become real. We were no longer running from the same world. We were running towards something we had chosen together. The days blurred together after that. We climbed ridges, crossed icy streams, doubled back on our own trails, and slept in shifts so shallow that true rest felt like a memory. My ribs healed slowly, the sharp pain dulling into a constant ache I could push through. Asha grew quieter the farther we went, but her steps never faltered. Every time the forest went too still, or a distant hoofbeat echoed, we moved faster, never speaking more than necessary. Yet each night, when we traded watch, her hand would brush mine for half a second longer than it needed to. On the morning of the 8th day since the slave market, Asha stopped at the mouth of a narrow defile between three sheer rock walls. She looked around once, as if checking memories against the land itself, then nodded. "This way." I followed her through the tight passage. The walls pressed close enough that my shoulders brushed stone. After 20 paces, the gap opened suddenly into a hidden valley no wider than a small meadow, cupped like a secret between the cliffs. A clear lake filled the center, its surface so still it mirrored the sky. Wild apple trees heavy with late fruit grew along one side. Soft earth showed between patches of grass, perfect for planting. A dry cave yawned in the base of the northern cliff, deep enough to stay dry even in heavy rain. The only way in or out was the narrow passage we had just walked, easy to defend, impossible to stumble upon by accident. Asha stood at the water's edge, shoulders dropping for the first time in days. "My mother brought me here when I was small," she said, voice soft, "before everything turned hard. This is the only place I remember that never felt like danger." I walked the perimeter slowly, checking the entrance, the tree line, the way the cliffs curved to hide us from above. When I returned, she had already knelt by the lake, cupping water to wash the worst of the dirt and dried blood from her arms. She stayed there a long time, eyes closed, letting the cold water run over her skin. I sat a respectful distance away and simply watched the valley breathe. "Here no one calls me a criminal," she said at last, without turning. I smiled faintly. "Here no one calls me a prisoner." We looked at each other across the water. For the first time since the market, a small, real laugh escaped both of us, quiet, almost surprised, but genuine. The sound echoed off the stone and died softly against the trees. The air felt lighter, as though the valley itself had decided to give us permission to rest. That night we sat beside the lake under a sky full of stars. The fire we built was small and smokeless, hidden by the overhang of the cave. Asha stared into the flames for a long time before she spoke. "That first night I called you my husband because I was afraid, because the lie would keep us both alive." She turned to face me fully, the firelight painted gold across her tusks and the strong line of her jaw. "Tonight I ask again, not out of fear, not because I need a shield. If you want, stay with me, not as a bargain, as a choice." My heart beat hard against my bruised ribs. I looked at her, The woman who had spent everything she owned to cut me free, who had walked beside me through exhaustion and danger without once asking me to carry her burden alone. And the answer came without hesitation. "I choose you." Her eyes brightened, though no tears fell. She reached out and placed her hand flat against my chest, right over my heart, as if she needed to feel the truth of the words. I covered her hand with mine. We stood slowly, the fire crackling behind us, the lake reflecting starlight at our feet. There were no more walls between us, no guarded distance. I leaned down and kissed her. The kiss was slow, certain, almost careful, the way two people touch when they know the ground beneath them has finally stopped shifting. Her lips were warm against the night air. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, one hand sliding to the back of my neck, holding me there, as if she still couldn't quite believe I had chosen to stay. When we finally parted, our foreheads rested together. Neither of us spoke. Words were no longer necessary. The next morning, we began to build. I cut straight saplings with the small knife she had carried since the market, trimming branches for a sturdy frame. Asha wove walls from tough vines and flexible saplings, her strong hands moving with the same precision she once used for weapons. We gathered flat stones from the lakeshore and stacked them into a proper hearth. I dug a shallow channel to bring fresh water closer to the cave. She dragged deadfall to camouflage the narrow entrance until it looked like nothing more than another tangle of brush. We worked side by side without needing many words. When one of us lifted something heavy, the other was already there to steady it. The rhythm felt natural, as if our bodies had been waiting years to learn this dance. At midday, Asha crouched and drew two parallel lines in the soft earth with her finger. They ran straight, then gently curved until they joined at the far end. "This," she said, "is the mark of two people walking the same path." I knelt beside her and drew a single firm line beneath the joined ends. "And this," I answered, "is the land we claim together." She looked at the simple drawing for a long moment, then at me. Something soft and certain settled in her golden eyes. That evening, we sat beside the new hearth inside the cave. The fire burned steady and warm. Asha leaned her shoulder against mine. I slipped my arm around her without thinking, pulling her closer. She let her head rest against me, the weight of her trust heavier and more precious than any debt. The slave market was far behind us now, the auctioneers' voices, the ropes, the mocking laughter. None of it could reach this valley. The words husband and wife were no longer a desperate shield or a convenient lie. They had become something real, chosen freely beneath open sky and stone walls that asked nothing of us except that we stay. Outside, the lake reflected the last light of day. Inside, two people who had once been hunted sat together and began quietly and deliberately to build a home. The week that followed felt like a gift we had stolen from the world. The valley held us gently, the lake gave us fish and clean water, the wild apple trees dropped fruit into our hands, and the cave kept the night wind at bay. We worked side by side each day, turning the small space into something that felt like ours. I built a low stone wall around a patch of soft earth while Asha planted the seeds we had carried from the forest edge. She taught me how to set snares that would not break a rabbit's neck too cruelly. I showed her how to weave a simple roof that would shed rain instead of collecting it. Every evening we sat by the lake and watched the stars come out, her shoulder against mine, my arm around her waist. The word husband no longer felt like a lie. It felt like truth we had earned. Then the past found us. It was late afternoon on the 7th day. I was reinforcing the narrow entrance with thorny branches when the first stone chime rang. A soft, clear note Asha had set up with balanced rocks along the only path in. I froze. She was already moving, knife in hand, eyes sharp. 3 of them, she whispered, listening. Heavy steps, armor. They found the trail. We had prepared for this. I took the short bough we had made from springy yew and climbed to the ledge above the cave mouth. Asha stood by the lake's edge, mother's knife held low and ready, feet planted like she had never run a day in her life. We did not hide. We waited. The 3 warriors stepped into the open. The leader was a massive orc with a scarred jaw and eyes full of hate. Varrock, the chieftain's son who had burned the human village and pinned the crime on Asha. The other 2 carried spears and wore the black fang markings of her old clan. Varrock's gaze locked on Asha and his lips curled. "You should have stayed gone, traitor!" Asha's voice rang clear across the water. You came to kill us and blame the wolves, but I will not die with your lies still on my tongue. You led the raid. You burned the grain. You killed those men. I only refused to follow you. That is why you chose me to carry the blame." One of the younger warriors shifted uneasily, spear tip dropping an inch. He had not known the full story. Varuk snarled and charged. I loosed an arrow. It struck the ground between his feet, kicking up dirt and forcing him to skid to a halt. Asha moved like water. She darted low and slashed at his leading leg with the small knife. The blade opened a shallow cut across his thigh. Varuk roared and swung his axe. I dropped from the ledge, shoulder slamming into his side before the blow could land. We crashed together onto the rocky shore. Pain flared through my healing ribs, but I held on, wrestling the axe from his grip while Asha spun and threw her knife at the second warrior who had drawn a bow. The blade sliced the bowstring clean in two. The string snapped with a vicious twang, and the arrow flew wild into the trees. The fight was short and ugly. Varuk was stronger, but he fought alone. Asha and I fought together. I pinned his sword arm while she pressed the edge of her recovered knife to his throat. "We could kill you right now," she said, breathing hard. "But I will not become what you tried to make me. Live. Go back to the clan. Tell them the truth. Tell them who really burned that village." Varuk's eyes burned with fury, but the younger warrior, the one whose spear had wavered, stepped forward and spoke. "I will bear witness. I heard everything." 3 days later, another orc arrived at the valley mouth alone. He wore the markings of a senior warrior and carried no weapon drawn. He listened while Asha told the story again, voice steady. When she finished, he bowed his head. "The clan was wrong. We chose silence because the truth was inconvenient. Varuk will face judgment. You are no longer hunted." Asha did not ask to return. She simply said, "I already have a home." The warrior left, taking Varuk with him in chains. That same evening, we held our real ceremony beside the lake. No crowd, no chieftain, only the fire we had built together, the quiet water reflecting starlight, and the small knife that had once belonged to Asha's mother. I brought the length of rough rope that had once bound my wrists at the slave market. We had carried it all this way without speaking of it. Now we laid it on the flames and watched it blacken and burn until nothing remained but ash. I scattered the ash across the surface of the lake and said, "You did not buy me. You set me free." Asha took my hands, her voice low and sure. "You did not stay because I called you husband. You stayed because you chose me." We stood there until the fire burned low, foreheads touching, the valley holding us like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The seasons turned slowly after that. The garden grew. Tender green shoots pushed through the soil and became rows of vegetables. We built a proper roof over the cave and a small lean-to beside it. I caught a young mare that had gone wild near the old trade road and built her a simple pen. Asha taught me which roots could heal and which berries warned of poison. I taught her how to read the wind so we would always know when strangers approached. We no longer kept watches through the night. We slept beside each other, trusting the valley and each other to keep us safe. Some mornings I still woke reaching for the rope that was no longer there. Asha would press her palm to my chest until my heartbeat slowed. Some nights, she still listened to the forest with old fear in her eyes. I would pull her close and remind her with quiet words that we had already won. The story began when I stood tied to a post like livestock in a slave market, bleeding and alone. A woman the world had tried to break stepped forward and spent everything she had left to cut me free. She looked the traders in the eye and said, "He is my husband." At first those words were only a shield. But every mile we ran, every meal we shared, every time one of us stood between the other and danger, those words grew roots. They became truth. She gave me back my freedom. I gave her back her name. Together we built something the world had tried to deny us both. A place where no one could sell us, chain us, or decide who we were allowed to love. In the hidden valley between 3 stone walls, 2 people who had once been hunted chose each other without debt and without fear. We planted seeds, we raised a roof, we burned the last rope that had ever bound us. And when the wind moved through the apple trees at dusk, it carried away the final echoes of the slave market and the lies of the Blackfang clan. Here, in this quiet place we made together, we finally learned what freedom really means. It is not only the absence of chains. It is the courage to look at another soul and say without hesitation or bargain, "Stay, this is home."